Tensions just surged at Scarborough Shoal. After a dramatic collision between Chinese vessels, a U.S. destroyer sailed into the disputed zone. Why does it matter? This episode reveals how maritime rules, regional partnerships, and international norms are tested in real time. In this video, we'll break down the collision, unpack the U.S. naval maneuver, and explore what these moves signal for diplomacy, alliances, and navigation rights. Stay tuned as we reveal what's really at stake in these strategic waters. The week began with a jarring accident in the South China Sea near Scarborough Shoal. A China Coast Guard ship collided with a Chinese Navy destroyer while both were pursuing a Philippine Coast Guard vessel escorting local fishermen. Footage shared by Manila showed the smaller vessel's bow badly dented after an apparent head-on crash, rendering it unseaworthy. According to the Philippine Coast Guard spokesperson, J. Tariela, Manila offered medical assistance over the radio, but received no reply from the Chinese side. This incident carries significance far beyond the damage inflicted. Scarborough Shoal, called Bajo de Masinloc in the Philippines and Huangyan Dao in China, lies well within international waters, yet it has long been a flashpoint. A 2016 tribunal invalidated broad Chinese claims based on historic maps, but Beijing continues to operate in the area, intensifying friction with the Philippines. Why is this pivotal? First, it reveals how internal coordination issues or risky maneuvers can backfire, turning an enforcement effort into a moment of vulnerability. Second, the timing and nature of the collision, during an attempt to block Filipino fishermen, highlights the human dimension, livelihoods, sovereignty, and routine activity becoming entangled in geopolitical pressure. South China Sea incidents are no longer distant headlines. They involve civilians and national economic interests. Adding to the situation's gravity, the Philippines swiftly condemned the action, labeling it aggressive and questioning whether a shift in Chinese tactics is underway. Philippine military officials pledged to review next steps in consultation with their political leadership. What does this teach us? When maritime operations intersect with contested claims, even routine actions can unexpectedly spiral into international flashpoints. This collision underscores how fragile situations are. Even routine enforcement without coordination can spark wider alarm. And this sets up the next twist. Just one day later, the U.S. responded, not with commentary, and this sets up the next twist. Just one day later, but with movement, it reveals that delays aren't an option when the rules of the sea are in play. Exactly one day after the collision, the U.S. made a deliberate and visible move in the same area. The guided missile destroyer USS Higgins entered waters near Scarborough Shoal, marking the first known U.S. military transit into that zone in at least 6 years. China's Southern Theater Command promptly condemned the action, stating the vessel entered without approval and asserting that the passage violated its sovereignty and stability in the region. They claimed they monitored, tracked, and warned off the ship. But the U.S. had a very different narrative. The U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet asserted that USS Higgins' mission was entirely consistent with international law, specifically the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, emphasizing the principle of freedom of navigation. They stated firmly, the U.S. will operate wherever international law allows, and no claim will deter them. This scenario highlights a battle of framing. One side portrays the vessel's transit as a breach of sovereignty. The other is an affirmation of navigational rights. For viewers, it's like witnessing two rival scientists interpreting the same data set in completely different ways, each side convinced of its conclusions. But the data, in this case, the ship's location and legal context, remain constant. This isn't just symbolism, it's strategic. Scarborough Shoal lies near pipelines of maritime trade valued at over $3 trillion per year, making it a corridor of immense economic importance. For the general audience, here's what to take in. When the U.S. sends a warship into contested but internationally accessible waters, it's not about provocation. It's about demonstrating that norms still carry weight. And when the other side counters with claims of sovereignty, the scene becomes a real-world test of rules versus repeated presence. We see that tension isn't always about confrontation. It's sometimes about confirming who will stand by principles when the sea itself becomes a stage. What do these recent events around Scarborough Shoal spell out for regional security, alliances, and international norms? First, timing sends signals. The U.S. didn't wait for clear skies or calm. A day after the collision, it reaffirmed that navigation rights matter and they're enforceable. This swift action demonstrates that maintaining open seas isn't academic. It requires real execution, even when tensions are high. Second, alliances gain clarity. The Philippines, citing threats to fishing livelihoods and national access, offered visuals of damaged vessels and escalating behavior. The U.S. response, entering the area, reflects to Manila and neighboring states that security ties come with presence. It says, "We stand by rules that protect regular operations, not just large-scale exercises." Third, risk is real, but calculated. Following the collision, a Chinese fighter jet intercepted a Philippine Coast Guard plane within 200 feet, warning it to depart the area. Nearby, 2 U.S. ships, including USS Higgins and USS Cincinnati, were present about 30 nautical miles away. Still, no further incidents occurred. This points to both the volatility of the region and the discipline exercised by multiple actors in tense spaces. Finally, this is a reminder that rules must be upheld. Just like astronomers rely on telescopes to validate theories, nations depend on actions to reinforce legal principles. Freedom of navigation isn't a catchy phrase. It's enforced by ships sailing where they're entitled. It's about preserving access for science, trade, and fishermen. To the viewer, Scarborough Shoal isn't merely an atoll. It's where principles meet practice. What's taught here is that maritime norms aren't paper shields. They demand commitment, presence, and clarity. That's why even routine patrols gain weight in these scenarios. Scarborough Shoal may be just coral and water, but this week's events turned it into a high-stakes test of laws, alliances, and regional balance. A collision, a strategic naval transit, and an aerial close call all remind us that global norms live or die in tiny spaces on the map. Curious how this shapes tomorrow's maritime dynamics? Hit like, share your thoughts, and subscribe. This conversation is only beginning. See you next time.